Well, a very warm welcome to the next instalment of pre-learning for the AQA Power and Conflict anthology. Today we're going to be looking at War Photographer by Carol Ann Duffy, a sensational poem, really powerful poem as well. Now remember, this should last about 10 minutes or so, and you can watch, pause, take notes, and then I will test you on them at the start of next lesson. Good luck. Now, in many ways, this is fairly out of date, this poem, because it deals with a source of photography that we don't really see much anymore. More's the pity. Before the digitalization of cameras, a war photographer would be in a really dangerous part of the world, taking photos and all the rest of it, and would come back with their films, their spools of film, and then they would have to go into a dark room and use lots of chemicals to get the images across. And in dark rooms, you couldn't use white light because that would ruin the film, so they'd use red light in there as well. It creates quite a sinister atmosphere in there. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a dark room, but you have to have this image in mind before you read the poem. Well, essentially, let me give you a sense of what this poem is about. It's a third-person narrative poem, and the third-person poetic voice, it discusses and describes really how a war photographer tries to make sense and order out of horrific images. One can only imagine the types of images. You might have seen them in like historical textbooks and things such as that. And of course, the poet explores how we, the public, and specifically the British public, are indifferent to, i.e., we don't have an opinion of, and detached from war in other countries, and also how perhaps we don't understand the realities of war. And we think about the wars that are going on at the moment in the world. We've got Ukraine, we've got, of course, kind of Israel, Gaza, Palestine, all that stuff that's going on. Actually, this poem explores, do we really understand those realities? So let me read this poem to you. In his dark room, he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church, and he, a priest, preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears beneath the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane, he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. So let me go through some quotations for you. They're not the only things to look at, but they're a good start for you. Let's have a look at this one. Spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. Now, you might notice in this poem there is a lot of sibilance. There really, really is. And what that does is it creates a sense of aggression and violence in the poem. And I wonder why that might be. On the one hand, it might represent the aggression and violence of war, but also the poem is rather scathing about people who are from essentially middle class England, not really understanding or not caring about the wars that go on in the world. So it could be that, but I think most importantly, it's that sense of kind of war is evil, and that this war photographer has seen untold evils. And we speak about that S sound being kind of serpentine and sinister. And I think for me, that's how I might interpret that. But it's up for debate, of course. Now, one of the most interesting images in all of these poems, in my humble opinion, is that this photographer is being meticulous. So getting these spools of film and in their darkroom, putting them in ordered rows. Now, I wonder why that is. A, this photographer could be just very good at their job and meticulous at doing it, but I think it's more than that. I think this photographer has seen such chaos, such carnage, such bloodshed, such death, that they're trying to ignore or trying to detach themselves from the pain of what they've seen, and it really contrasts with the chaos. So that's why I think they've put them in these ordered rows, trying to make sense of the horrors of war. Really interesting one. Someone said actually an essay a couple of years ago, brilliant response, actually, does this reflect kind of war graves that might be set out in ordered rows? Who knows? But I think it's a really interesting image. So brilliant stuff from Carol Ann Duffy. And then we get this really interesting simile with lots of kind of biblical allusions that are going on, as though this were a church and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. So this simile is used, and if any of you have been to a Catholic mass, when a priest is doing communion, for example, they get everything in order: the wine, I think they call it the tabernacle, I think it's called, the goblet or whatever they drink the wine from, the bread, and things such as that for communion. So getting things ready. So it's a really interesting simile, but why? And one interpretation is that actually, like priests and Christianity in general, they're on a mission to take Christianity to the world. Maybe that this photographer is on a mission to help people understand the realities of war. Someone said once, it's almost like it's a funeral. This is the only dignified ending that some of these photos or the images in the photos might get, because they've suffered such indignity. But both of those interpretations have a little bit of weight. And then we get this metaphor of the guy putting the photography paper into these chemicals, and you'd have to wait a good 3 or 4 minutes, and then you'd see, with the old style photography, you'd see the image start to appear. And we get this metaphor here: faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. Now this is a play on words, because is the half-formed ghost, is that because the picture is developing, or is it because he's got an image of someone who is who is dying and actually is almost dead but not quite really? And it really highlights the horrors of war there. It really, really does. And it's a superb metaphor to use. It's a harrowing, grotesque metaphor to use, but my goodness, powerful. She doesn't really pull her punches, Carol Ann Duffy, and why not? It really makes that point in such a persuasive manner. And then we finally get that swipe at middle class England and Britain. They do not care. Talks about kind of having a bath and the pre-lunch beers, and actually, reading the Sunday papers. But using that pronoun they, I think that is really aggressive. It's confrontational. They do not care. And it highlights the anger of the photographer, as the public are not moved by the images of war, whereas they should be. And actually, they are sheltered from that reality of war. And that comes through that pronoun they. Really powerful again. So what do we say about the form of the poem? Well, it's written as a third-person narrative, and that third-person narrative, it does create that sense of detachment. If you compare that with kind of exposure, where it's first-person plural, where you get the kind of the lived, real experiences. So why do we get that sense of attachment? Now, it could be the photographer trying to distance himself because he doesn't want to deal with the emotions of what he's seen, and one can only imagine what a war photographer will see. But is this Carol Ann Duffy having a cynical swipe at the public? Because this is what they do. They don't engage with the realities of war. It happens somewhere else. It happens on Sky News, BBC News. It happens on your smartphones, but actually not really understanding the realities. And that really chimes with that line, they do not care. So it's really rather interesting. We've got these strict 6-line stanzas that end with a rhyming couplet. And I think this really contrasts with the chaos of war. But I think what it is here, it's the photographer trying to control his emotions, trying to get things in order. And we see that with the kind of the ordered rows of the spools and things like that, trying to control his emotions while seeing those grotesque things, trying to make sense of the horrible world that he's seen. And perhaps the couplet at the end of each of those stanzas, that could represent kind of closure, maybe kind of death, but maybe, of course, almost like the public ignoring the reality. Someone said once, because that couplet, the couplet's repeated, people make the same mistakes. They continue throughout the ages not to understand the realities of war. And we've seen that with our poems, haven't we? So finally, just to finish off, you'll know this really famous poem from the Vietnam War. Children are fleeing a napalm attack. Napalm was a weapon. It was an incendiary weapon, so it set things on fire. And it was a type of chemical fire that was really difficult to put out. I don't know the details, but these guys are in absolute pain. That young lady there is in great pain indeed. And you know, I think what the poet's trying to say is, you know, war continues to be an evil in the world, but actually in the West, but particularly middle class England, middle class Britain, ignores the realities. So look, good luck with this poem. It's one that some students find really complex, but I'm not quite sure why. It's a brilliantly put together poem. Spend a bit of time on it. Get your notes up to speed, revise them, understand those key principles, and then compare it with another poem and another type of question. It's a really useful poem. All the best. Thanks very much.